quilting friends. I am very happy to be sewing with you and to teach you a little bit about quilting. But I want to start with the basics so that as you learn, you will have this fundamental knowledge of how to make some very common quilting squares using rapid techniques for making multiple blocks at one time. But before we get started, we need to go over some basic supplies. We have squares. We have the acrylic rulers. I have this in a 12.5 inch as well as a 26.5 inch ruler. We don't need to buy the fancy rulers, but we like the fancy rulers. So read your email. I've got some recommendations for you. You'll need some pins. I'm sorry to tell you this, but you'll need a seam ripper, some scissors, a cutter with blue blades. You'll need some thread. This is a Frixion pen. It erases when you iron it. You'll need an iron, and you'll need some spray starch. In addition to all of our supplies for sewing and cutting, we need something to sew and cut, so you need some fabric. So I'm going to make my demonstration out of this Christmas fabric and this white background fabric, and this is printed with leaves, holly leaves. When you get a typical bundle of fat quarters, they are 21 by 18. So when you see a direction that says you need a 19-inch strip, you need to make sure that you are cutting in the long, to get all that 19 inches in. This month we're going to be making the maple leaf, and for our quilt we're going to make 4 of these, and they'll be in the 4 corners of our quilt. So the first thing we need to do is to analyze this to see what kind of squares we need to make. When I look at this, I see 1, 2, 3, 4 half square triangles, and I see a 4 patch right here, and I see a square. Our quilt that we are making will end up each month with a 12.5 inch unfinished square. This is our first word that we're going to learn. When you get quilting directions, you will often find the words unfinished and finished. The meaning of this is very important. Finished is the finished size of the square once it's sewed into the quilt, and unfinished is the size of the square before it is sewed into the quilt. So if we look at this quilt block square, the whole square is unfinished. It's not sewn into a quilt, but you can see that these squares inside are sewn into the quilt. So these are at their finished size, and this is at the unfinished size. Quilt designers will often tell you how to make these things with just cutting out squares and cutting them into triangles and sewing them together. This is very inefficient and it's very inaccurate. So we are going to analyze this card and come up with an alternate way to make this. We're going to make a 4 patch with 1, 2, 3, 4 squares in it, and we're going to make 8 at a time half square triangles, and with those we'll be able to make 4 of these squares, which will be in the 4 corners of our quilt. But before we get started, we need to learn a little bit about what equals an accurate quilt. To get a final quilt that is accurate, you need to press your fabric before you cut it. You need to cut with accuracy. You need to sew with accuracy, and then you need to press again. And so each of these will be discussed a little bit today and throughout the year as we do our block a month. When we are considering what fabrics to choose for our block this month, you need to note that we are making 4 of these. That uses a lot of fabric. In order to make 4 of them, you do need 3 colors. You need your background, your color for your half square triangles, and your color for your 4 patch. When I'm looking at the directions of the 4 patch, The first thing it says is to determine the square size. So I gave you the directions down here of what our square size is going to be and what to cut your strips at. So we are going to cut our strips at 4 5/8 inches. In our directions, we need to cut 4 strips. We need 1 of the background and 3 of our first color. My first color will be this red. And so I'm going to demonstrate cutting on my background fabric so that you can learn how to cut accurately on any fabric. Step 1 was press fabric. So I pressed with starch about 10 inches of fabric because I know today I need 10 inches of fabric. And now I'm going to do step 2, which is cut accurately. When you're cutting on folded fabric, you need the fold to be perfectly in alignment with a line on the ruler. And that will make sure that that 90-degree angle right there will make, when you open it, it will keep this completely straight. If this was this way, when you opened it, you would have a crook in your fabric, and we don't want crooks, we want straight. So I'm going to line this up. And you can see my raw edge isn't even, so I'm going to cut the raw edge off so that it's straight. I want you to look at how I'm holding it. My thumb is pressing here. I've got 3 fingers on the ruler. I have 1 finger off the ruler. This finger keeps the ruler from slipping while I'm pressing against it with the cutter. Sometimes I will do even 2 fingers. So it's just whatever is feeling comfortable for the day. Always have 1 finger at least. And I'm pressing pretty hard. I have a brand new blade in here, so I'm going to cut that off. And I need to cut per our directions and cut at 4 5/8. So this is 4 1/2, and so 1 more is 4 5/8. 1 more tick on that line, because half is 4/8, so 4 5/8 is 1 more tick on the line. And I'm finding a line down here to make sure that my fold is still on that line. It should be really square. They should all squared up nicely. So I've got my ruler reads half, 1 1/2, 2 1/2, 3 1/2, 4 1/2 right here, 4 5/8. I double checked. Always double check before you cut. Okay. So the directions say cut a strip that is 19 inches long. So I'm going to cut off the selvage. The selvage is where they print the name of the fabric on the side, and there's no print of the leaves on it. And I am going to put the number 19 right up here. That's the 19-inch line. And the 19 gives you some wiggle room, so it doesn't need to be perfectly straight on this side, but we're just going to go and cut that at 19. So this is the first strip that we need. And this is my 3rd strip of the red. And now I'm going to line up what I'm going to sew. It says sew together your 2 blocks. So we're going to sew together a dark and a dark and a dark and a light. That will make our 2 blocks that we're going to sew. I'm going to align these up. Make sure that your print, if you have a white on white print, make sure that you are doing these right sides together. The right side of the fabric has the print on it, the wrong side doesn't. And I'm going to line those up. And you can see that my red came out a little longer than the 19 inches, and that's just because I cut on the long side rather than the 18-inch side. I like to pin a lot. You'll see me using a lot of pins. Some quilters say that's an overpinner. I'm an overpinner. But this just makes sure that I sew where I intend to sew. I have sewn so many things without pinning and then rip them out again. This step, we are going to sew accurately. We need to sew 1/4 of an inch. On my sewing machine, I have placed some tape. You can use masking tape, painter's tape, whatever tape you want. But this black line here is 1/4 of an inch away from my needle when my needle's in my center position. This sewing machine comes with a 1/4 inch foot. And this foot has a blade on it. And the fabric will glide along the blade and the needle will hit right at 1/4 of an inch. So if you have a 1/4 inch foot, use it. It's a good tool. When I'm sewing, I like to use these pieces of scrap fabric to get the needle in a piece of fabric before it goes into my fabric. This fabric serves several purposes. One is that it will cover the feed dogs. Those are the things that go up and down when your needle is going up and down. And it protects the fabric from going down into the hole that the needle is going into. So you'll see me using leader and enders. Ender is obviously, so another piece of scrap at the back side. And I'm going to press my foot. And we're going to go. And I just put that right in. All right, we pressed our fabric, we cut accurately, we sewed accurately, and now it says press again. So let's talk about that press after we sew. Fabric, it just wants to hang out where you've put it. It doesn't really want to bend, it doesn't want to do anything. So now we have to make it do our will. So I am going to soften up the stitches. To open it up, and the directions say press to the dark side. Well, I have 2 dark sides, so it doesn't matter. So I am going to take my whole seam here and I'm going to press it up like that, like this. But I want to make sure that on this side that I've got this as flat as possible and that there's no little divots or anything that are popping out, so that it doesn't have any folds in the press line. So just again, you soften, and now we're going to bend this fabric to our will. We are the dark side, we're pressing to the dark side. Okay, nobody laughed. You do see me lifting and pressing a lot because that's what we should be doing, and we shouldn't be ironing or pressing. Now I've made sure that there's no little folds in my seam. Soften those threads. I'm going to open this up. I'm going to finger press it open. And then pressing the seam open all the way. And now we have some repeats to do. I pressed, now I got to do something next. I have to go back to step 2. I'm going to cut accurately. So when you look at this, you've got both of these are pressed in a single direction. So I'm going to lay this one down, and this raw edge is pressed to the dark side, so there there's kind of a little ridge here. You can feel it with your fingernail. And this raw edge is pointing up. And I'm going to just lay them on top of each other. And you don't have to do this step. It just saves a little bit of time, not enough time. And so if you're not comfortable with it, just cut one piece at a time. But you can also just lay them right sides together. And with your finger, you're feeling those two ridges, one here and one here, are locking together. And you can feel them, and you can feel them when they're not locked together as well. And we are going to do the same thing that we did before. I'm going to turn it this way because I'm right-handed. And I'm going to make sure that I feel like they're locked together. This one didn't feel right. Okay, now it feels really good. Okay. The directions say subcut into 4 5/8 inch units. So I'm going to do the same thing that we did before. I am lining up a line on the ruler with that seam that I just sewed. So I'm using the thread line as my lining up so that I get really perpendicular to what I just sewed. I needed to go to there. All right, here we go. So 4 5/8. Stop cutting it. That's 1, 5/8, 2. Okay, you can cut. As you can see, I didn't move my base fabric. I just moved the ones that I cut kind of out of the way. And I'm going to cut my last one now. And that's 4. Now, one of the joys of doing this interlocking and cutting is that they are ready to sew as they are. I will use a pin to make sure that I have those ridges really mashed against each other. And I will sew these with my dark on top because I want my sewing machine to come down this edge and hit this. It will push this seam kind of against the bottom one so that I get a really good point at that corner, which is going to be a 4 corner, 4 pieces of fabric coming together. Here are our 4 units sewn together. So we've sewn accurately. It's back to press accurately. And this press is really fun to watch. When you do this method of sewing your 4 patch together, a fun little thing happens, and this is really cool. You can see that this seam goes this way, this seam goes this way. The seams are going to want to go in a circle, so I'm going to push this seam this way. And look what happens to this. I get right in the middle, I am going to get a little 4 patch. It's just like the one I sewed. So I'm going to give this a gentle press to warm up those stitches because I have to bend it to my will. And then I'm going to do the same thing on this. I'm going to make sure that I have no folds, no divots. And I will do that 4 times. And that is our 4 patch. And we can line it up with our picture. We just rotate it like this. And we have a 4 patch sewn together here. The next step after open and press, which we've done, is to trim to 8.5 inches unfinished. So this is going to be bigger than 8.5 inches because I gave us that extra squidgy room so that we could trim out our inaccurate sewing and cutting because I'm not very good at the cut accurately, so accurately. I try hard. Okay, let me trim it. I'll show you how I trim it. Oh, okay. I like using a square ruler because it has some markings on it that I find quite useful. The first marking that I find very useful is this diagonal line, and when I'm cutting a square, I know that this diagonal line is going to go from point to point on my square. But we're using this to trim up our square, and so we're not getting things at points yet. We have stuff on the outside. The first thing we need to know is that half of 8 1/2 is 4 1/4. So on this square, I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, and I'm going to line up my white square with the 4 1/4 inch line. And I'm going to do that on this line and on this line. So my center line is going to be on that 4 1/4 all the way here, so it's all the way down my seam of the 2 units and all the way down the center seam at 4 1/4. And you can then see that when I trim it up, here's the 8 mark. I need it to be 8 1/2. That 8 1/2 is going to be really tight, but that's okay. It's there, and I will have it for trimming. So now I'm going to trim this up. When I trim this, I'm not putting my fingers out here because I'm trimming in 2 directions, and I don't want to cut my fingers. So I'm putting my finger way over here, but now I don't have any weight over here. So I'm going to use the weight of my body. Here we go. Ready? I'm going to go 1, go up, and 1. So we've done the side and the top. Now I have a perfect 90-degree angle right there. This is the corner that we just cut with the side and the bottom. And I'm going to put my 8 1/2 mark, which is right here, to right here. And I'm going to make sure that I've got 8 1/2 so I can see my numbers. It's 8 and there's the half. And again, I can see my numbers going to 8 1/2. And I'm going to just trim off you can just see I'm just trimming off threads here to get our square, which is now 8 1/2 by 8 1/2, unfinished. All right, our next unit is the half square triangle. We're going to need 16. So I'm going to have to make 2 sets of 8 at a time. We're going to cut a square of fabric from both our colors, so dark and light, and then we will draw lines 1/4 inch from the center on each side going in each direction. And then we will sew on those lines. And so those are shown in red, and then we're going to sew on those lines. After we're done sewing, we are going to cut horizontally and vertically, and then we will cut diagonally. So let's go and do that. The first piece of information I need is what size do I cut my squares? Well, I need 10 1/2 inch squares. And my opposing fabric is my background, which is the white. Okay, I've cut out my squares. Now I'm going to draw my lines. So I'm using this 1/4 inch line on this ruler, and I'm lining up from corner to corner, and I'm going to just draw my line. 1. I'm going to turn my fabric, draw 2. How you draw your lines doesn't really matter. Okay, here's a fun fact. If you flip your ruler over, the first solid line on the other side is at 1/2 inch. And 1/2 inch should be 1/4 inch on the other side. So I'm just going to use that 1/2 inch line. My eyes like a really loud visual clue that I'm doing things correctly. I have both my squares marked, I'm going to put them right sides together with my fabric. So wrong side goes up, put them at the corners, give them a little shake. Same with this guy. All right, you want to pin where you're going to sew. It's really convenient to pin here because then you're sewing and you don't have to take any pins out. But you really want to hold the fabric where you are sewing. So I'm going to pin at the four corners. Hold my little blocks together. And now I will go and sew my lines. For this one, I put in my regular sewing foot on because I don't need a 1/4 inch seam here. I want to sew directly onto that red line. I have sewn my lines in both directions. So I have sewn 1, 2, 3, 4 lines. And the directions then say, so we've cut vertical, cut horizontal. So we're going to cut vertical and horizontal. I know that half of 10 and a half is 5 1/4. So I can line up my 5 1/4 on the edge, but really I'm going to look at keeping this as straight as possible. And the center should go through the 2 intersections of those stitches. And it's basically 5 1/4. It looks really good. Holding my finger on the outside. And do that. And then cut the inside line. And the inside line is also 5 1/4. I'm just making sure that these kind of are squared up. Okay, now I've got those. 1, 2, 3, 4. If I put them together really carefully, I didn't move them. I can take that 1/4 line that we like so much on this side of the roller. I'm going to put it down right onto the red line because I haven't pressed this yet. I'm going to put it right on the red line. So the dotted line is on the red line, and I'm going to cut between the 2 sewn lines. And I'll do it in the other direction as well. You guessed it, the paper's back. I've cut accurately. I've sewn accurately. It's time to press. Let's go press accurately. All right, here are 4 of the squares. And I'm going to press just like I did before. I'm going to soften those squares so I can bend the fabric to my will. And I can either press it to the dark side, and that is perfectly acceptable pressing. I can also always soften those stitches, and you can see it remove the red line. That is the joy of a Frixian pen. It is also acceptable to press these open. So you're going to want to do a little finger press, a gentle tip, 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 tip down the center there, flip it over, and make sure that you've got a nice flat. When you see that they both look the same. It doesn't matter how you press them. You can either press them open or press them to one side. And it's a personal preference. This is a little bit flatter. This has a little bit of a ridge. I don't care on my quilts, and so you'll see that I'll do both on the same quilt. We have pressed, but we aren't done. So we have to go cut accurately again. And these are going to be squares, so I like to use the square ruler. And my directions say to trim this to 4.5 inches unfinished. So I am looking at my ruler. And what's nice about these is that there's a diagonal from point to point. I like to use that diagonal. So I'm going to put my ruler on my square with that diagonal going straight down the diagonal of my unit. This means that this is my most important seam. So I want to make sure that I am tracing along that seam to get my squared up unit. On this one, I gave us plenty of extra trimming room. And I need to make sure that I have 4.5, which is this line here, available to me to trim all the way around, and I do with this particular placement of this. So I'm going to turn this up. I'm going to move this down to the other side, so I flipped it 180 degrees. I'm going to use that same line. This time I'm lining up right here at my 4.5 inch line, the 4.5 inch line, and I will straighten that ruler. 4.5 by 4.5, and I'm going to trim this up, and it's going straight down there. I've double checked everything. And I will do that a few more times. All right, I have all my half square triangles. I have my 4-patch. Now I need to cut that. In the beginning, I cut this long strip of the white, so I'm going to use that. This square is 4.5 by 4.5. We're almost at the end. It's time to sew this together. So we have our square here, that's this kind. We have this square up here, that's this kind. And we have 4 of our pinwheels. So just line them up so that they're all going in the right direction. This matches our drawing. Now I'm going to take these two and sew them together, and then I'm going to sew it to this unit, and I'm going to sew these 3 together separately, and then I will sew this bottom half to the top half. Alright, I've sewn the 2 units together, but I don't know which way to press them. So I'm going to peek under here to see what direction this is going. This seam is going down. So I want this pressed going up. So, over here, press to soften, and press that way. So now they'll nest together. And this one is coming towards me, so I want this one to go that way. Soften and press. Okay. And we're going to So this unit to here, and this unit to here. That's my next step. Develop the pressing plan for sewing this to this. We've already taken care of this seam, and that seam goes that way, so we may as well have this seam go that way too, and then this seam will come towards me. I'm going to give this a press. I want them to go in the same direction, just softly going that way. There. And this is going to come towards me, press, and put it there. With that pressing scheme, we should get nice locking seams right here. You can feel them. And the next one. Let's go sew it. For this one, I think I'm going to press the seam open, and not just because this now has, quite a few bulky layers right here, and just to kind of cut down on the bulk at the intersection, I'm going to press this guy open. I'm going to soften that a little bit, and then I'm going to finger press it open, just so that it knows where it's going to go eventually. I finger press it. I'm not pressing here with a lot of weight. I'm just gently giving this a hit with the heat, so that when I flip it over, those will stay in the direction that they're supposed to stay in. And then I press it. This is our unfinished square, and we're going to look at a couple of things so that you don't think that you've got mistakes. When you're working with angles and this is unfinished, you need this bit of white space right here, so that when you sew it into the next seam, it'll hit right at that point. So if you have white space here, that's a good thing. You're going to have it on all of the edges where you have your half square triangles. And it should measure right at 12.5 by 12.5. This ruler is 12.5. And voila! We did it all. We pressed fabric, we cut accurately many times, we sewed accurately many times, and we pressed accurately. And as you can see, with the methods that we learned, sometimes cutting accurately and sewing accurately doesn't have to be perfect, because we trimmed and got that second cut accurately to be the accurate cut to get us a square that finishes at 12.5 by 12.5, unfinished. And that is our first block. It will be the corners for our square, for our quilt. I want to also tell you that I was designing a sashing to go between each block. And so I picked a color in this fabric line that I really like. And I am going to use white for my main, it's a star sashing. So I picked white for the star points, and I picked I haven't picked it yet, but it's going to be a red or a green for between each square. I also, when you're buying your fabric, buy probably, we had to buy 3 yards of your background, that's plenty. Buy a yard of fabric that you like with your back border so that we can play with sashing. And we will learn all kinds of fun new techniques. Thank you.